Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everag's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're back with a bit of a quick update on some market background to this week's Pulse event and, of course, Chart of the Week. So let's get into it.
Around the futures markets where there's action, and European skim milk powder has crept higher after sort of bouncing around a few weeks, not really strongly, but...
Some interesting factors at play there, Steve. The Algerians have just announced a tender for the last quarter of this year into the first quarter of 2025. A bit more excitement in the market. Obviously, the supply shortages that we're seeing that we'll talk about a little in a while. And on the GDT last week, skim milk powder, it was quite divergent trends between the New Zealand and the European product, wasn't it, Steve? So some better signs there for skim milk powder.
The butter market continued to roll, this time a little bit focused on short term. And I guess what we're hearing is, as the trade filters back from those extended holidays, maybe some people caught out thinking the market would have corrected downwards by now and got over this big surge, but there's still some uncovered positions, so a bit of short-term cover still going on. But as you can see, not much action. In fact, it weakened further out into 25. Still a very firm market and no sign that it's going to alleviate soon. Look, we'll look at the reasons why this is so strong, I guess. Joe, that's a 3-day picture. It probably picked out the most dramatic, and we heard some of this occurring just after the Olympics finished off. Very hot weather right across the board in Europe. We saw some drops in weekly French and German milk production year on year in the weekly numbers in early August. So this is probably continuing, given we've seen these high temperatures for much of the time since then. Temperatures are going to ease in the coming 2 weeks. It does get a lot better, but the focus of the hot weather is certainly moving east. While that'll help the cows in western regions, except Spain, feed crops will still be under pressure, and they're already under pressure in those regions. So still a fair bit of challenge ahead for milk production.
Sure. So I guess the question becomes, with this big butter bubble that we've got, what can diffuse the situation? And I guess, Steve, on the supply side, as you said, if EU milk output improves just with the cooler weather, expecting a bit of growth year on year against last year's comparables. There's a lot of uncertainty around the fat content of milk, though, just given the impact on feed quality of these conditions over the last couple of months. The other factor on the supply side is if cheese demand slows, that would release more milk for skim and butterfat. Then there's the rising New Zealand seasonal availability. Little change in the mix slightly, given where China is in terms of whole milk powder demand. And those GDT offerings are rising in coming auctions. And then we've said for a while about the different FTA conditions that are prevailing, the differential that's crept up in pricing. New Zealand imports of AMF could also alleviate this supply side situation. But what about demand, Steve?
So the high prices won't last long from the importance of butterfat to different users. Expecting the EU market, we are yet to see the full transmission of high wholesale prices into retail. We are seeing a little bit of a slowing in retail spending, according to panel data. But I think in the developing world, that's already in play, that the trade volumes have started to fall. In Q2, we saw lower trade in AMF in particular. That pushback, I guess it exacerbates the New Zealand availability. If trade falls and we've got more product coming, we are going to see, GDT is the signal, we are going to see pressure on that in coming months. The other side in Europe is, cream demand will slow as the weather cools. It's kind of ironic. We see the seasonal differences in demand and supply are going to play out. I think we look at that a bit later on. And the other factor, Joe, that we saw this week, the US cheese market's had a break. It's gone back 2 weeks when you look back at 2 weeks ago in the futures curve, but production headwinds both for cheese production and milk supply in some key regions has put a bit of stiffness in that in early contracts. Okay, looking at Pulse, Joe, what happened overnight?
Yeah, look, Pulse results, both milk powder prices were up. Skim milk powder was up 2.4% on last week's GDT event and 2.8% higher than the previous Pulse event. So you've done some figuring here, Steve. You have to go back 10 pulses to see a jump of this size on the previous auction result. So a little bit of a different trajectory on that ski jump there, Steve.
Yeah, this is my against the grain theory on Pulse, but it does bobble up at times. Whole milk powder sustaining the impact of the heavier involvement at the previous auction. Whole milk powder went again on 1.6 on that auction result and up more than 5% on the previous Pulse. So this is certainly one to watch. We've said, are China back? That last GDT result was encouraging in terms of their participation. Well, this is kind of supportive of that theory again, but we'll still need more events to see if that continues to deliver.
Sure.
Chart of the week. What have you got, Joe?
Yeah, we thought we'd take a bit of a closer look at Algeria given the announcement of those tenders this week. And this is just a chart of skim milk powder trade to Algeria, and you can certainly see when those tenders come into play, Steve. It's quite lumpy, a little bit different to whole milk powder. Whole milk powder is much smoother in terms of those monthly volumes, not as obvious with the tenders when they're announced because it's a much smoother trade. And if you look at the rolling annual tonnages, you can see there obviously whole milk powder is a much higher volume trade overall, but just in terms of the trend on those moving annual total lines, it's a little bit steeper for whole milk powder, so a little bit stronger demand for whole milk powder. And when you look at the differential value of fat and protein in skim milk powder AMF as opposed to whole milk powder, it's pretty good buying still, isn't it, Steve? That gap is continuing to increase in the last couple of months. So whole milk powder is pretty good buying. This is from a GDT analysis, but it really does reflect that differential value given where butterfat is at the moment, Steve.
Yeah, and while it stays elevated, that remains a yawning chasm, which is inviting some greater trade in whole milk.
Sure.
Okay, well, that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. We'll be back again next week.